New Media Comedy Worldwide Studios. New Media Comedy Worldwide presents Comedy Legacy Series with Jim Mendrinos. And now, your host, Jim Mendrinos.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Comedy Legacy Show. I'm Jim Mendrinos, your host, and one of the most fun parts of this for me is I get to talk to some people that are lifelong friends, people that I grew up with in the industry, and today we're going to be talking to Carole Montgomery, who might literally be one of the first real comics I met when I started here in New York City. And we have such wildly opposing viewpoints on how to create and how to write. It makes for a fun conversation. We argue with each other all the time when we're together, and we're going to talk about some of those differences here and how she creates. And even more important for you guys, she is a master at reinventing herself. From the National Mom to, Funny Women of a Certain Age, she always comes up with something new to keep herself relevant in the industry, which is what we all need to do as performers as we keep moving on. So without any more hesitation, let's bring up your comic for today, Miss Carole Montgomery. And we are here in quarantine. We're recording this in May with Carole Montgomery. There she is, one of my oldest friends in comedy. I think I met you
when you were a fetus.
I was a fetus, but I think I met you literally my first month in stand-up.
Probably.
You and Jeanette Barber are the two that are still around that I met during that time.
You're a little brat. You're a little brat, just fucking. I ain't be a comedian.
And all these years later, I still want to be a comedian.
I know. Look, I'm wearing Brooklyn Dodgers.
Oh.
Yes. So I'm sorry. Continue with this fabulous introduction.
No, this fabulous introduction. And we are here to talk about all things comedy and hopefully give you guys some wisdom for the next generation. There's a whole lot of comics that are unfamiliar with your work, so we're going to cover a little bit of your history, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay.
I wanted to start with where you are right now, because we are in pandemic, and one of the most amazing things that I think I've seen is even in the midst of a pandemic, artists have to find outlets.
Right.
You started a talk show.
Yes, so I did.
Give me a little insight on what that's about and how you came up with it.
Well, as you know, because for the people who are watching this, Jim and I disagree on everything. And so, this is not a put down to any of the comics. We all have to figure out a way how to do our creativity. Jim was one of the first people to go, do you want to do a Zoom show? And I said, not on your fucking life. I'm not, and I still won't. It's just not what I want to do. But what I also mentioned earlier to Jim was I was so taken aback by this. I mean, I still to this day can't really wrap my head around. Like, I remember when it was first starting, because I was still doing shows when the virus was still around in March. And we were joking, around like, well, we'll just wipe the mic, or we've lived in comedy condos, so we're immune. And it was all these really, and I remember saying, how the hell are they going to lock down New York City? The rest of the country is a different story because it's not as dense as us. And then we locked down New York City. There was nobody. The only people on the streets at the beginning of this were me and my husband, because we made sure we walked every day, and all the homeless people, because they were like all the crazies were living, now they're like, nobody's here, we can really be crazy. So for the first few weeks, I just was walking around like a fog. Like, I couldn't believe this was happening. The other show, which we'll talk about also, the show that I created, Funny Women of a Certain Age, was premiering on March 14th. That Friday, we were on the Today Show pushing it, talking about the pandemic, and then everything went to shit on Monday. So it's kind of been this very surreal thing. So I didn't do anything. I literally you didn't see, I was on social media and stuff, but I just kind of pulled back and went, I got to figure this shit out. And then about a month ago, I went, everyone's doing something, and I don't want to do stand-up per se, but why not do something where, Julia Scotti is one of my dearest friends, and she's on the second special. And I thought, Julia and I I could see us working as a host and co-host. So I asked her if she wanted to do it, and I had no idea what we were going to do. I call it the Early Bird Special because it's for people of a certain age, and it's every Wednesday at 4 p.m. on, we StreamYard it, and then it goes on to Facebook Live. But it gave me something to do, because that first month, I literally from the moment we got up, we were eating, and as soon as it got to 6 p.m., we were drinking. Like, we didn't do anything for a month because we were so taken aback. So that's what the show is. It's the Early Bird Special. And we talk to other female comics about their lives and what, it's basically a continuation of Women of a Certain Age.
All right. So let's start right there with Women of a Certain Age, because you were at a point in your career where clubs were dwindling for all performers when they crossed the other side of 50.
The other side, yes.
It dwindles like nobody's business. And rather than bitching about it or complaining, but, well, I also know you well enough to know you did those things too.
I did too, yes.
But in addition to the bitching and complaining, you went out and just said, fuck it. If the industry's not going to feed me, I'm gonna hunt. And you started Women of a Certain Age. Talk about that process.
Well, one of the things, and you know this now because you're over the hill now, young man. And the industry, and it's not just comedy, it's theater. Well, theater is different. Theater will always value older people, but the rest of the industry, film and television, they just, comedy, if you're old, And so when I turned 50, I started to see it, because this is a really interesting thing for people who are listening. I have been doing stand-up for 40 years. I actually found out because everyone always had their date, and I remember I said I couldn't remember my date, and I actually found an old diary. So I started on September 5th, 1979, okay?
That is exactly 4 years before I started. Okay. I started September 5th, 1983.
Okay, so we have another thing in common. So, and I always say, I could have murdered somebody and been out of jail by now. So, so I was always a road comic. I got to headlining really early because there were not a lot of strong female headliners. So I was always a road comic. I was a national I worked all over the country. Moved to Vegas, did a show there. When I got back to New York City, I was told by people who were trying to book me that I was no longer a national headliner, even though I've played and have thousands of TV credits. And I was like, huh? What do you mean? Well, you have to have, social media wasn't big then, but it was, they were just, it was a different thing all of a sudden, because I was starting to, I was 50 at that point. So I started to work on directing, and I was developing solo shows. I actually worked with Jim on his show, which you should do still, and that's a whole other podcast. And about, what am I, 62? I guess I want to say I was 59, and I was doing another podcast with a bunch of other female comics, and we had the best time. They were all, road comics. We just had the best time. And I remember calling my husband, Todd, and I said, I think this is an idea for a show, because I started to think of all the women I knew that were in my age range. And so I happened to luck out. We premiered at the Cinderblock Comedy Festival in Brooklyn in 2000. It's got to be 2017, September. I think it was also September 5th. And it was a huge hit. We sold out. Judy Gold was on the show. Ginny Garofalo was on the show. Rhonda Handsome, me. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. But it ended up being a great show. There was somebody who was one of the volunteers for the festival, and she said, I work at the Crane Theater. I want to pitch this show to my boss because I think he'd really like it. And he gave me a date in December. He loved it, and that became a residency, and we're in our third year of our residency. So I just was like, I've always said this, even when every time I got older, I said, we're the ones, old people are the ones that have the disposable income, because, my son still, who's 28, as you know, still asks me for money. So we're the ones that have the money. Why aren't people, going to us and doing programming for us? So in the midst of all that, my partner, Dave Goldberg, I used to bring him projects all the time, and he's the one who I did the Shank Forbes. We taped his special 5 years ago. So we've always had a really great relationship. And I told him about the idea, and he says, I think it's a great idea. Let's start pitching it. The first place we went to was Showtime, because that's where that was my big break. The Showtime Comedy Club All-Stars,
Yeah.
Tom Rickles. So I'm very loyal that way. Jim knows this about me. So I said, I really want to go to Showtime first. And they loved the idea. But, you know, I literally said to them, I think we had done one show at that point when we pitched it. I said, look, let us get our feet on the ground and let's do this. So in February, we did a big showcase at the Crane, and every network was there, including Showtime. And, you know, and from there we got the special, and then, you know, it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Yeah. Even in the pandemic, like the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start releasing little videos of each of the girls, whether it's the live show or the TV show, just doing something, you know, a little cute thing. Lunel sent me one already. Fran Drescher's going to send me one. Caroline Ray's going to send me, like, so everyone knows this is a great idea. And you know, and I've said this, you know, I'm not kissing Showtime's ass. Good for them, because they saw what a great idea this was. They really did. I mean, you know, they understood the market was ready for this. The reviews have been great. The great thing about a pandemic, by the way, if you ever decide you want to premiere a show, you should do it during quarantine, because the ratings, of course, went through the roof because everyone was home set on March 14th.
All right, so let's talk about that process of reinvention, because you've done that so many times. You know, started with you being a New York City comic and then being a road comic. One of the first pregnant comedians ever on television, if not the first.
I don't know if I was the first. That's a good question. I don't know if I was the first. I might have been. I mean,
you were one of them.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
And it was Evening at the Improv, wasn't it?
Evening at the Improv. When I got off stage to hug Bud, you could tell he was like freaking out because he was afraid I was going to break my water or something. Like literally, it was literally the 8th month, so I could have given birth on stage. But one of the things that I love about comedy, and Jim knows this about me, you know, I was going to do this no matter what it took. Do you know what I mean by that? Like it just, you know, I've always loved it. And I've had to shift so many fucking times. But, you know, my manager said, don't get pregnant. You're going to ruin your career. And I was like, well, I want to have a kid. And I knew that I was early 30s, I think. I had Lane when I was 33, so I was 32. And I was like, I have to do it now. I can't keep going on the road. So every time somebody said you can't do it, I went, watch me. And I did, you know, I mean, I had Lane, the Showtime Comedy Club All-Stars that I mentioned, that ended up, I was back on TV like 3 months after he was born. I ended up getting that then. So I've always done that. I've always reinvented myself, because there's, as you know, there's no straight line in stand-up comedy. Everybody thinks, well, I'll be Seinfeld. And yeah, but even Seinfeld, you know, he was a major road comic before he did the TV show.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's always different avenues that you can go.
Yeah. Now, you went from being a road comic, and then you got the first residency in Vegas.
Yes.
When you went out there, and you opened for a burlesque style show, by being kind.
Yeah, it's a titty show. I mean, you can say that. I mean, what happened so when I started, you know, I cut my teeth here in New York City. You know, I was a Catch a Rising Star act. I wasn't a comic strip act because Lucian didn't like me. The Improv, we you know all the stories of that. And then Who's on First with Pete Spellos he gave me a place to work out. I was there every weekend. He was amazing to me. And then I started going on the road and bumped up to being a headliner. But one of the things this is really interesting, and you know this. But back in the day, when you started to have some kind of, not notoriety, when you had a few years under your belt, you left New York and you went to LA to try to make it in LA. And so many people don't do that now, you know. So I literally I started in 79. I got married in 84. We were in LA, I want to say 88. So like 9 years in, I went, okay, I'm going to go try to be in Los Angeles, which ended up not being the smart, like I ended up on the road anyway. Yeah. And started doing TV, had the baby. The reason I ended up in Vegas was because when Lane was a little baby, I would leave to come back east to work, and he'd cry every night. Don't leave me. I mean, like, he knew Jewish guilt better. Still knows how to do that shit. And so I was literally, I love telling this story because this is such a bizarre story. So I was working at the Riviera Comedy Club, and shout out to Steve Sharippa because he's been my guardian angel in comedy. He's always protected me and took care of me. And so I'm literally in, and you know this because you've done this on the road too. You know, when you used to go on the road a lot, you would take stuff to make your room look like homey. So I was, I had driven to Vegas. I knew I was going to be there for a week. I put up my little pictures and all the stuff, and I'm putting away the stuff in the bathroom, and just to make it seem like a home. And I remember saying to myself, you know what would be great? What would be so fucking great if I could just find a place to work and stay home and be with my kid. And the next fucking day, you talk about like all that, putting it out in the universe. The next day, fucking Sharippa calls me up and goes, listen, the comic next door in Crazy Girls, she had a heart attack. She's going to be out for the summer. Do you want to work? And I was like, yeah, duh. As long as I can. I literally made Todd bring my son to me. So we lived in the Riviera Hotel 2 months. Like Lane thought, well, every kid just goes down to the buffet for breakfast, and every kid just goes and plays in the pool all day long, and had all the maitre d's bringing him food and shit like that. And I had somebody watching him. And then at the end of the summer, they decided they wanted to keep me. And that ended up being 5 years of Crazy Girls. And then a year later, we were about to go back to New York, and I got offered to do the same type of show at Midnight Fantasy. So that's why I ended up in Vegas all that time. Mm-hmm. So I ended up raising Lane with some kind of normalcy, except for the fact that Mom worked with kitty girls. Other than that, it was a very normal childhood.
Yeah, he has some interesting childhood photos.
Yes, he does. The best photo, I have it somewhere. I have to find the photo. So he's 13 years old. We're about to leave, and he came to see the girls. And we took a great photo with him, right? And one of the lead dancers, so all the girls are here, Lane's here, and the lead dancer had decided she would sit in front of him. And at the last minute, she turned her head like she was blowing him, and we took the photo. And he almost died. He turned so green because you're 13 years old. I mean, Jesus Christ, Yeah.
So I want to talk to you because this is one of the things I most respected about you. You took so much flack from the industry in New York when you started about people saying, "Oh, you work too dirty. Nobody wants to hear a woman talk like that." But you had a vision of what your art should be,
right?
And stuck with it. And in my opinion, you paid a price for it. There was a lot of shows you should have been on that you didn't get on because of it.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk us through that process of making the artistic decision of I'm going to do what I'm going to do and not let anybody else in?
Well, my heroes, besides of course Lily Tomlin, who is my big hero, but both Carlin, of course, and Pryor, and even though they were considered dirty comics, the brilliance of what they did is like, I tell people, I tell dick jokes. I said, but I do them in a way that people go, I never did it to offend anybody. I just did it because that's how I talk. That's how we talk. I mean, that's what we do. So this whole thing about, I was never going to be a Seinfeld comic. I just wasn't. Right. I've done enough TV now. The only network TV show that I did that I had to be clean was on the Rick D show. And I was able to do clean material. I mean, I can do it, but that's not who I am. So that's everywhere. Now, what's so funny is that I'm not, when you look at other comics now, I'm really kind of milquetoast. Yeah. Compared, you know what I mean? Felicia Michaels, Stephanie Hodge, Sheila Kay, the four of us, and Thea Vidal, we were the dirty girls. And Thea works on cruise ships now. So obviously when you've been doing stand-up 40 years, you can figure out how to be clean and not be clean and all that bullshit. So I just, stand-up comedy is, is part of is a piece of you. So why would I cut off who I am? So I stuck to my guns because I was like, this is who I am. I'm not going to be Rita Rudner, who I love and think is great, but I'm not going to do that. I don't write that way.
Now, I also want to talk about this because you not only took flack from industry, but because you were also a woman, when you were doing headline gigs, people forget, you started late 70s, the machismo of the male comics trying to blow you off stage.
Mm-hmm.
How did, I know how you handled it, but for the audience that's out there, can you talk a little bit about the process of what you had to go through as one of the first female headliners?
It's funny because you'll hear me say this a lot. I just did what I did. I had a feature act who I will tell you afterwards, but
Oh, I know who it is. We
had a discussion, and I was doing a college game. He was so pissed off that he wasn't headlining. So he ends up doing 40 minutes between us, like the opening act did 10, he did 40. And I'm like, you motherfucker. I said, okay. So I just waited till he was done. And you have to cross the comic as you're going back on stage. And I looked at him and I went, and now watch how the big boys do it. And I went into hyperdrive. I threw everything at. I destroyed it. I don't talk about destroying very much because I don't believe that. But I was just like, okay, you motherfucker, I'll show you how it is. Because he thought he did well, and then I came on stage. I was just, it's. You've heard me say this. I don't have to prove that my dick is bigger than any of yours because it is. You know what I mean? So. As a woman, I was lucky in the sense that I had a reputation as a not giving a shit, and I would get into fights if I had to, and nobody wanted to fight me. So, do you know what I mean? So I'm really lucky as a woman in the sense that nobody would really fuck with me. The male comics would, but then I would go on stage and prove myself, and then they couldn't say anything. And it's so it's a matter of just you have to really believe who you are as a comic on stage. And I have that, that's the one thing I had going for me from the beginning, because I knew who I was. I only became a really great writer till later on in my career. Or as my son says, Mom, you just do a lot of faces. Just make a lot of faces. I'm like, yeah, well, those faces bought you a fucking house in Vegas. So,
Do you think it's easier now for female comics than it was when you started?
I think I think there's more of us. I don't know if it's easier. It really depends on what they're talking about. There's still, which is amazing to me, that there's still women out there who are doing obvious stuff. And when I see that, I'm like, ugh, really? You have a chance to do something and you're doing obvious. But there's some look, being a woman when you're on the road, you're immediately vulnerable more so than a male comic. There was a club that I worked where they put us up in a Red Roof Inn that was a Section 8 housing. It was right next to the club, so this way the club owner didn't have to drive us. And it was the only time in my life that I ever slept with a chair under the door because I was that worried. I didn't sleep. I literally did not sleep because I was so terrified. So as a woman, you're always going to have to deal with that. You are, even me, who's a New Yorker and is aware of it, you're always going to deal with the fact that you're a woman alone. So that must mean you want something.
Now, when we first started, gigs were plentiful. It was a land of milk and honey. They used to pay to fly us in.
The old days.
Yeah.
And cocaine. It was a great time.
It was a great time. And then the market shifted. Market shifted right about the time that you left Vegas. It started shifting while you were there.
Yeah.
Then it made a total shift. And there was a drop-off. About half of the class that started out with you and I left. In the late 90s to early 2000s, just simply because they couldn't deal with, the change in the market. How were you able, and what did you do to identify the changes and figure out what you're going to do next?
Like I said before, I was aware of it because of my age. So I remember actually on the phone with Steve, with Sharippa, because we were talking about, because he was doing some booking. This was before he was, became a big star on Blue Bloods and The Sopranos. And he was, he was helping me book rooms. And he goes, Carole, he goes, there's just nothing out there. Because this is when I was because it was like a year before, between Crazy Girls and Midnight Fantasy. And he goes, there's just nothing out there. And I remember thinking because I used to be able to pick up a phone and call and say, hey, I just had a fallout. And they'd be like, let me get right back to you. And they'd cancel somebody and put me in. I never had to worry when my work was, something happened if the club closed. I knew that I could put the word out and I'd get work. Well, that immediately went gone. So I was like, okay, how are we going to figure this out? So that's when I started doing the other stuff, like the directing and the solo show development, because that at least brought in income another way. It still hasn't recovered. Because the people because of social media, they're bringing in, pre-pandemic, they're bringing in people that are not really comics, but they're YouTube stars or they're, TikTok stars. And so, you always have to feel like you're juggling 100 balls and like something will stick. So I just, I went, okay, we're moving again. Now we got to try this, And, I was lucky because I'm married. So my husband's working sometimes I'm working. So we're able to manage, getting out there. But like this, we didn't have bar shows back in the day. You didn't have bar shows. There were, you either were a regular at a club or you weren't. And that was the only way you worked. So it's, the biggest advice I would tell people is, learn to juggle, man, because you're going to have to figure out, because you're going to be going down one road and thinking, oh, well, this is going to happen. And then, nope, that's gone. And with the pandemic, we're not looking at, I don't see clubs opening up in New York City before after Labor Day.
Yeah, I think you might be right there. Let's talk about clubs for just a few minutes, because you and me I think I've worked with you in more different kinds of venues than almost any other human being on the planet. We've done outdoor shows, we've done military-based shows, we've done beautiful theaters together, we've done, rinky-dink comedy clubs, we've done awful one-nighters. Do you prep for shows differently, or do you just do what you do?
And once again, this is where you and I differ.
Yeah.
I just do what I do. I know that you prep. I know, Leanne, I always give Leanne shit because she's got, an encyclopedia and is always writing everything down.
Yeah.
I don't really do that. The only time I do that is if, because to me, it's my job. Like, for example, though, if I go back, when we go back to whatever it is, like we have a show in July in Texas. So chances are, I would say right now, chances are very high that we're going to do the show. Unless there's a second wave, I'm going to have to go on YouTube, look at old videos of me and actually write down what I want to say. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be able to, because I don't remember any of my act. But I'm not somebody that prepares. It's only if it's important. Like when I was doing the specials both times, because I was also the executive producer, we were on set from 1:00. We didn't shoot till 7:30. So I was doing EP work up until 7. And then they would push me in the back and go, you have to concentrate on your act. And I literally had my notes with me because I had no idea. Both times I was like, I don't know what's happening. And that's also has to do with age. But I don't prepare. You, I know, do.
Yes, yes, I do. Now, you and I also are similar that we don't have an ego on a show. One of the funniest things, and I often have comics talk about it whenever you and I work together, and they go, who's closing? We're almost fighting for who gets to go up first.
Yes. Oh, no.
Yeah. Are you that same way with people that you're not friendly with? Or is there a little bit of my dick's bigger than yours in those times?
No, not anymore. Because I don't have to prove anything anymore to anybody. I don't have to prove it to myself. If somebody wants to go on if someone wants to close, if they really need to close, and I'm still getting headliner money, go for it. Have fun. But people, what your audience has to know is the best spot of the show is the feature spot.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because you got the MC who takes the bullets first. And okay, so they're prime. The best part is that middle spot. People, they're just getting their drink buzz. They're happy. They're doing everything. So it's 30 minutes. It's boom, 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 and then the headliner. It's still a great spot, but you have to work. You have to fucking work as a headliner, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people. Like I, you know, we know a lot of comics that like to go long. People used to ask me when I was doing the road all the time. They used to say, "Do you need a light?" I said, "Don't worry. Don't worry." And literally, I would get off at 45 minutes. Like, I'd be in the middle of a joke. I'd be like, "Good night." What are you doing? I said, "You said 45, right?" Like, I have no ego about staying on longer. I can, like, there was one time when I first moved back here, there was some show at the Broadway, and they asked me if I wanted if I'd come to a spot. And I got there, and there were like 6 people in the audience, and they were like all these young female comics. And I said, "You know what? Split my time up. I don't need to go on tonight. Give it to the girl." You know, like, I don't.
Yeah.
You know, you and I have had this discussion. The reason I don't write every day is, first of all, I write on stage. If I come up with an idea, 9 out of 10 times I will talk about it while I'm on stage. Do you know what I mean? So my thing about going on stage every single night is I don't have to work on my timing. That's pretty solid. If I need to work on a piece, then I go out every night.
Now, let's talk about that development, because to me, you're literally speaking French when you say you write on stage. So do you go up with notes? Do you go up with an outline? Or do you just go up and go, "Want to talk about Lane and his first date? Go."
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much how I've written my entire act. So,
Now, do you go back and revise the tape, or do you just, tomorrow night, whatever you remembered from tonight is what you do?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, if it's a new piece, and and it's been quite a while because I haven't been on stage in a while, but if it's a new piece, I will go off stage and go try to remember what I said. I'm like, okay, because I do tape everything, but I'm always trying. Okay, what did I say? Okay, and I'll write down keywords, as we all do. But yeah, no, I've always written that way. Every so often, you know, because my husband also, he does do a lot of writing for me. My husband's the type of guy that he will say 100 bad jokes, but that one joke will be so great that you're like, okay, well, that's going in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but I don't sit down and write. Like, there's a meme that I just put out, which was, did you see it? The one where about the 6 feet and the 6 inches?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So I put that meme, and I had come up with, I literally out of nowhere, it just came into my head. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to put that out on social media. And so I was here in my office, and Todd was sitting on his desk. And I went, how does this sound? Should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? And then we both figured out that this is the way it should sound. And it got a huge response immediately without making it a meme. And of course, then we made it a meme because I want to make sure that nobody steals that fucking joke. So I will do that when I have to, but I don't do it all the time.
Now, I would think one of the benefits of writing the way you do is that everything comes out organically in your voice. You never have that awkward, like, right. How does this have to sound?
Right.
How much over the years have bits evolved for you?
Wow. Are you talking about, well, you know, because me, I don't throw anything out. I'm like the comedy recycler, you know. I mean, I literally, for the second special, all the material was about Lane. From the moment I gave birth to 28. So that material is really fucking old.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure this has happened to you where you'll think somebody will say, hey, remember that bit you used to do? And I'm like, oh yeah, well, I'm not doing that bit. And then you do it, but you tweak it. You tweak it in a way like, you know, oh, maybe if I say it this way, or if I drop a letter, or I do that, and it'll end up being a much better joke. I mean, all the stuff I did about Lane, the reason that happened was I was originally the first special I was going to do the Lane chunk, and I just couldn't, for the life of me. You know, I'm 62 years old. I can't remember shit. So I was literally working the weekend before the special was going to be taping. And I was working in the Poconos, and I was doing, you know, my 45 minutes of dick jokes. And there's a chunk in the middle of my act, which is just like that, tight, fucking perfect. And I remember saying to Todd when I got home, I said, I'm doing that piece. because I haven't done it. Like when you're doing a TV show, you grab pieces from all your different bits because you're trying to, do it concisely and everything.
Yeah.
So that's why that didn't happen for the first special. I did really tried and true material for the second special. I didn't know we were having the second special, but because I was working on the Lane stuff to try to get it for the first special, it ended up becoming part of my act again, and it got stronger and it got tighter, and that's why it ends up in the second special.
Now, let's talk about two things. One is, I remember when the Underground Comedy Festival had live shows in New York.
Yes.
Me tagging you to MC.
Yes.
And asking you to MC, because in my opinion, the MC is the most valuable position on a show.
Oh, yeah.
If your MC is good, you're going to have a good show. If your MC is horrible, you have a horrible show. And you are an unbelievably underrated MC.
Aw, thank you.
So what do you think makes for a good MC?
Well, I think the reason I think the reason I'm a good MC is because the 10 years in Vegas, because basically that's what I was doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, people are not coming to see me in Crazy Girls. They were coming to see the tits. And, okay, there's 10 minutes of a woman talking, so we'll listen to her. So I got really used to, like, there's stock lines that I did in Vegas that I will still use now. Like in Vegas, there was always a father that was bringing his fucking 21-year-old son to see the show. So I would immediately find him. You know what I mean? Like, and I would always and that would become my go-to person. Everything I did was to him, and I still do that. I always find the youngest person in the show so I can fuck with them. I did it on the first special. There was a young girl right in the front row, looked like she was 12 years old. Just nailed her. And then Lynn Coppolis, who went on after me, after Carrie, she went right after her. So there was a nice little, flow through. But the thing about an MC is, it's not about you. It's about the show. And that's the thing. As a comic who was in titty shows, it's not about you. You're there to make the people laugh, and let's bring on the girls again. So if there's, like, in other words, you open the show, warm the crowd up, where you're from, what do you do, maybe do a couple of jokes, bring on the first act. At some point, if you want to do your material, do it somewhat in the middle of the show where it's warm, the audience is warm, so they'll be more responsive to you, and don't do a lot of material. It's not, being an MC is not about you, it's about the show, and that's really hard for comedians to understand.
Yeah, it certainly is. I also want to talk about performance style, because your style has evolved over the years, but it hasn't changed over the years. You're up there, you are bigger than life, you take control of the room, and it's just amazing. You have as much energy with me watching you now perform as you did when I saw you as a 25-year-old perform.
Well, that's the drugs.
Is it the drugs?
It's the drugs. So what's the question?
My question is, you stopped me with the drug reference and I had a flashback. My question is, performance-wise, how much of what you do was an evolution and how much was conscious thought and construction?
Well, I think when I was younger, I know when I was younger, I was a much angrier person on stage. And I took everything personal. That's the first thing. But I was much angrier. So when I went after somebody, people were terrified because I wouldn't, there would be no witty repartee between me and the heckler. It would be like, are you heckling me? And I would get off the stage and want to stab them. So I learned to bring that down. I think a lot of what you're seeing now on stage is 40 years of knowing that I'm good at what I do. Mm-hmm. And understanding the way crowds work. The great thing about Vegas was there were a lot of foreigners. There were, especially towards the end. But I would say 50% of the audience was foreigners. Sometimes it was all Asian. And I had to get up there and do my act as if they were laughing uproariously. And what you do at that point, you just go, hey, so, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. one, like in your mind, you're like, okay, wait here. This is where the beat is. This is where the laugh was. And you go in. So I learned not to take, I learned to know what is funny and what's not funny by having an audience that sometimes could understand me and sometimes could not understand me. So, and I think the confidence comes from, I know that I would say most of my stuff is funny. I would say a lot of it is funny. Sometimes there'll be a hit or miss, but for the most part, the jokes are there. So that comes from confidence of just saying, well, if you don't laugh, I'll be there. I'll be at another show, and they're going to laugh. And that's really hard for a comic. That the thought of not hearing laughter, which is one of the reasons why I won't do Zoom shows, but that's a whole other subject. The thought of not hearing laughter is really hard for us. And when I talk with people about solo shows, and I've even said this to you, Pete Spellos actually gave me the greatest advice about solo shows, is that if you are on stage doing a solo show and they're not laughing, that means they're listening, and you want them listening. So I sometimes, for the hell of it, will throw an audience just to see if I can get them back because I'm bored on stage. Because I used to do a whole bit about Lane and finding out that he jerked off, which is on the special. But back in the day when I first started doing that special, that piece, you could hear it. The audience was so fucking tense. They were so like, what is she? And then I came up with the punchline, which of course I can't remember right now. And the applause was so great because it was like a relief laugh.
Yeah.
So, but I do that. I like doing that. I like making the audience hate me and then switching around because I know I can do that. But that's 40 years of fucking stand-up. Yeah. Knowing how to just manipulate the audience. And when you're first starting out, all you want is them to laugh at you. All you care about. Are they laughing? Is it funny?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about a very specific audience that we did together for a little bit of time, and that's the military audiences. During the National Mom phase of Carole Montgomery.
Yes, that's right. I had National Mom. God, I did do a lot of shit, didn't I?
Yes, you did. And one of the things that I absolutely loved, because we brought a lot of comics with us over the time doing that, and you were a warrior. You won on all of them. I got to stay home and do some administrative stuff sometimes, but you would go, and the audience average age, I would say 20.
Yeah, maybe even younger.
Yeah, and I've never seen people laugh harder at your stuff than those audiences, which kind of proves two things. One, that good comedy is timeless, but two, that you understand how to talk to them. And what was more amazing to me than even the time you spent on stage was watching you interact with them off stage, and how much time you spent talking to the soldiers, and how much time you spent hanging out with them and being part of their lives for the times we were on base. Can you talk about the experience of doing military tours?
Well, as you know, those are like, my son hates when I say this, but those tours were the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though my son's like, what about me? I'm like, forget about it. My dad was a Korean War veteran, and he didn't talk much about it. The story is that because he was injured, he was shot in the hand. So I don't think he saw a lot of battle, but the story, and to this day, I'm assuming it's true because I've heard it enough, was that he was, they were in a foxhole. He was, I think, the guy he was the gunner, the one who puts the bullets in, and he was in the center, and two people were left and right of him, and they were both killed, and he wasn't. So I always knew that I wanted to go back to, I always wanted to do something for the troops because of my father. Even though I was not like, as a kid, I never said, "Oh, my dad's dad's ex-army." I never was that type of kid. It was always in my mind. And I was asked for years to go there, and I was like, I'm not leaving until my son is an adult. And when he was 18, we were doing the New York Underground Comedy Festival, and I think it was one of the last years. And you were busy doing something. And you handed off this email to me.
Yes.
And it was Armed Forces Entertainment, and they said we want to we want to see some of your comics. And we had a showcase, and I didn't think I could go because I am dirty. And I know that the military, wants it to be somewhat clean, even though, they're shooting people. And we ended up doing a showcase at Gotham, a live showcase.
Yep.
And the head of the civilian head of Armed Forces Entertainment, I closed the show that night, said to me, "Oh, you're going." Okay. So and we ended up, the first tour we ever did was in Iraq, and during the war, it was, to this day, that experience was, there were so many feelings. It's such a as a woman, you'll love this story. You were not on this tour with us. It was me, Stephen Cruiser, Mark Riccadonna, Felicia Michaels, and Leanne Lord. Okay, so we get off the plane, and this is the first time we've ever done this. So I didn't know that you had to go get visas. So we're trying to find out where to go to get out of the airport. And I'm the leader, I'm the troop leader, and not one guy, I would say, "Excuse me, do you know where?" And the men ignored me. So I had to go to fucking Cruiser and walk up to him and go, "Can you be my chaperone so we can find out how to get the fuck out of here?" And he, of course, that was the greatest day of his life, that he had to be my chaperone. And of course he found it, and we ended up being picked up by the right people. But Felicia Michaels is this gorgeous blonde woman, and there are no blonde women in Kuwait. So I'm literally holding on to her going, if you fuck with me at all, I'm selling you to the highest bidder. Because I'm telling you, it was to be a New York Jew and a feminist in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Blew me the fuck away. You're like, all right, you know what? Maybe it's not so bad here in the States. It's bad now, but not back then.
I kept telling everyone the scary part wasn't being on the bases. Scary part was the airport to the bases.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when you travel into third world countries, for lack of a better, when you're traveling in countries that are not America, they don't have boarding. They just open the doors, and you basically are running for your life to get to a seat. And I remember I want to say we were in Germany, and they had taken it was a bus of people. We were going to the plane, like sometimes you have to do this. And there's like 50 people stuck in the thought of it now with Corona would be like, oh my God. And we're stuck there, and we get up to the plane, and they don't open the door, and we're just sitting there. And it's getting hot, and you know me, I'm older, and finally, I start banging on the wall thing, like, get us out of here. Then everybody started fucking, get us, because they were so used to being like, okay, we're staying in here now, okay. And then, it gave me the greatest, what's the right word? The feelings of being able to do that for the military is one of the greatest accomplishments I've ever done. But you really get spoiled as an American, because they don't care. Sometimes they care and they want to kill you. That's another thing.
Yeah. There are only 2 times I've ever seen you at a loss for words.
Uh-huh.
The biggest time for me was after our first show in Korea,
Mm-hmm.
when you finally played Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the closest anyone's ever seen you cry in public. Yeah. Thank you, Carole. Thank you. But it meant a lot to you.
Oh, absolutely.
And
it meant the world.
Yeah. And I think the other one was a show at the Tribeca Performing Arts Center, when Lane finally understood what you were talking about all these years.
Yes. But the thing with the Korea, and that was the show that they gave me the plaque for my dad that had fake swords in it, so it took forever to be able to ship it back home. Do you remember that, when they were like, "You're sending weapons"? I'm like, "You gave this to me, you asshole." It meant a lot to me to do the Korea thing, because I knew it meant a lot to my father, because my father remembered seeing Bob Hope. So it was kind of a nice full circle. that now I was doing, one of what one of his heroes was doing, now I was doing it too. So it was a really nice moment. And yes, I might have shed a tear, but that is not this is not for the public to know that I actually have emotions.
I should edit that part out. Because Lord knows I'm going to edit that out.
Yeah.
We started at a time when there were still giants wandering around the clubs. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I brought Larry David on stage.
Yep.
How many times I brought Larry Miller on stage.
Riser. Bill Maher.
And even the generation before wandering in, I remember one night at Catch a Rising Star when Jonathan Winters wandered in to do a set.
Yeah.
So who were some of the people that, because for me, very notably, Sam Kennison kind of saw me when I was young and just went, all right, let me teach you how to do things the right way.
Right.
Who were some of the veteran guys that reached back and helped you? Were there veteran guys that reached back and helped you?
There weren't a lot of guys. The one time I remember is when I finally passed a catch. Paul Reiser was the MC. And I went on stage and I did my set, and he came off stage and said, you were great. You're part of the club. And I remember calling my husband and saying, Paul Reiser told me, it was such a, he was very kind and I don't know if I'm sure probably people have. It's really a long career. It's 40 years and stuff. My one favorite story about remember, I've been around so long that all these people weren't famous when I was, so I remember going to the Comedy Store one of the first times I was there, and I was lamenting because back then the rumor was that, Comedy Store comics stole material, and I was so afraid, and I was out, I'll tell you the whole story because it has to do with Sam also. But I was out there, I was waiting to go on to I was warming up, I was doing a TV straight to video special. And I was saying this to some of the comics who were sitting outside, and Sinbad, who was Sinbad, but not Sinbad, said to me, listen, Carole, they can take your jokes, but they can't take you. They can't take away you. And that's probably why when you talked about my persona and everything, that's where the persona really started. Because he said, jokes are jokes, but they can't steal who you are on stage. And the reason I was there was I did a straight-to-video TV special called Women Tell the Dirtiest Jokes. And it was me and Patty Rossborough and Judy Tenuta, Marsha Warfield, Lois Bromfield. Okay?
Yeah.
And I knew Sam and I knew Carl, Sam's best friend at the time. And they said to me, we'll get you a spot at the Comedy Store so you can work on your set. And Sam, I love telling this story about Sam because he was so sweet. And he was starting to get his little buzz, but he wasn't Kinnison yet. He came out to the LA Cabaret, which is all the way in Encino, in the middle of fucking nowhere. And because I was also doing spots there. And he came and he came and held my hand during the taping because I was so nervous.
Yeah. People forget he was a really decent guy. Him and Rick Wright from Rick and Ruby. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember Rick.
Him and Rick Wright sat on either side of Mitzi for my Comedy Store audition to make sure she watched. Because she notoriously would walk away.
Oh, absolutely. She would be like, oh, so I got to go get, and you're like, what? Yeah. No, so I guess I would have to say Sam, because he could not have been kinder, and saying, don't worry, I'll get you. And to this day, I do this every time. We were driving back to the Valley, and when you go over the 405 at night, you get to the hill, and you look over and you see all the lights of the Valley. Mm-hmm. And as we were driving, I forgot because I didn't have a car, so he was, I guess, maybe driving me back to the gig. I'm not really sure, but he said, I have this great view you guys have to see. And he took us over the hill and, saw the lights in the Valley. And to this day, when I'm in LA at night, I always remember that, He was a great guy. He was a very sweet man.
Yeah. So what advice would you give someone starting comedy, not now in the pandemic, but when it comes back? What advice would you give a young performer as they're in their formative years?
Research, watch as many comics as you can, right? I mean, that would be the first thing, watch it. Like I remember taping Carol Leifer when she had her first Letterman, like with an 8-track tape. Do you remember? I mean, I remember taping her on her first Letterman and watching it. And, and when Schiff did his, watch as much as you can, learn what kind of style you want to do. And then, we've talked about this. This is one thing we agree on. When you're first starting out, get on stage as much as you can. I mean, it sucks now. I mean, that's the thing that I think is killing, a lot of us, is because so many people go, I'm one of the rare ones that rarely goes on stage, and I'm missing it. So the people who are on stage like every night doing 4 or 5 spots, it's got to be fucking killing them. But that's the only way you get stronger, is if you're on stage every night, and write, everyone has a different style. Like I said, I write on stage, Jim writes every day.
Yeah. So you mentioned, listening and watching. Before you started stand-up, who were the stand-ups you watched? Who were the pantheon for you?
Well, Freddie Prinze.
Yeah.
I remember watching him on The Tonight Show and going, what's this? Like, what is that? I mean, he was it for me. I remember watching him, and it was so, it blew my mind. And, so it would be Freddie. Yeah. And people don't realize how great he was. He was so good. Like I listened to his, was listening to his album a while back, and I was like, man, those jokes are I mean, they're dated in the sense that because he's like, it's because he's using, his race and everything, but the jokes, the actual jokes are brilliant.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this because I probably started because of Freddie.
Right.
Having seen what he did on stage and him basically talking about my life on stage. I'm there like,
right,
I got to do this. But in the discovery of it, how old were you when you decided you wanted to be a comic?
I didn't know I wanted to be a comedian until I was told to. So I always, comics, as you know, when we're all together, we banter a lot, and we'll throw things, we'll just, we haven't done it in a while, but, when you're around, you'll bust each other's balls. There's a lot of, and so I was very good at doing all of that stuff. And I was doing summer stock in the summer of 1979. I was a lighting tech at Playhouse on the Hill in Ithaca, New York. And the group of people that I was with, it was about, I want to say 15, maybe 20 people who were the tech crew. And they kept saying to me, there was a guy named Ed Sherrier who also very quick-witted. He works for NFM Films now and, is a big-time producer and everything. But we used to banter all the time. And somebody said, you should be a comedian. And I was like, I don't really know what that is, I mean, because except for Freddie, there wasn't much for me to look at. So they said, well, so Ed and I sat down one night and he said, let's write some material. So we wrote like 5 minutes. I don't remember what it was. We were doing summer stock. So we decided to have a Christmas in July party, like after we'd done setting up the theater, and I did stand up in front of these 15 people and I loved it. And I went, oh, I want to do this. So that's when I really wanted to be a comedian. But my dad was always like, my dad was a high school teacher and a track coach. And at any like events and, school events or those type of things, my father was always the MC. He was always the host, so he brought that love of comedy. I remember watching the Marx Brothers and Abbott and Costello on Sunday mornings and, the Bowery Boys. So, it was always around me. And so, but it wasn't until I was doing summer stock that I went, oh, I want to be a comedian. It wasn't like young. I wasn't young when it happened. I was too busy playing with Barbie.
Yeah. All right. Final question, then we will wrap this up. Who was the first like major comic you worked with that kind of gave you some awe. Like I remember starting and getting a chance to open for Robert Klein and
Right.
just being gobsmacked that I'm opening for him. Was there anybody in that vein for you?
Well, you know this story, but I love telling it. And the only reason I'm pissed about this story is because we didn't have cameras then. So you have to trust me when I tell you it really happened. I was in the original room doing, doing a spot and everything. And I get off stage and this gigantic security guard, who was like 8 feet tall, comes up to me and he goes, "Excuse me, Mr. Pryor would like to see you." I was like, "What? What?" And he brought me over to Richard, and Richard at that point was very sick. But he was sitting next to Mitzi, and he leaned, and I was like, "What is happening?" I thought he was going to yell at me. You know comics. We're all like,
Yeah.
"What did I do wrong?" And he leans into me and he goes, "I think you're very funny." And I looked at Mitzi and I went, "I'm done." I mean, like I was so overwhelmed that Richard Pryor had watched me and took the time to say he thought it was funny. I called my husband from a payphone, hysterical crying. What? Like it was probably the greatest moment of my life, because this is my hero, and that he was able. And here's what's so great about it, because he was very sick, and he was and he was going on. So I stayed. After I spoke to Todd, I knew Richard was going on later. I went back into the room, and he was very frail, and he comes on stage, and and somebody heckled him, and clear as a bell, he became old Richard. He went after him so fast, and then went back into this. But like for a moment, you saw the spark was back. Like when somebody heckled him, he was like, "Motherfucker!" It was amazing. It was just amazing. So that has to be the greatest moment in comedy is meeting him. And then very quickly, you remember Dennis Blair, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dennis used to open for George Carlin all the time, and when I was living in Vegas, Dennis said, "Do you want to come see the show?" I said, "Absolutely." He goes, "Yeah, if George is feeling it, come backstage. Maybe you can meet George." And I was like, "Great," and so we went to see the show. George, of course, opens with my favorite line of all time. And this is how he gauged. This is important for the young comics, how he gauged the audience. He went on stage, and his opening line was, "You ever notice the people who are against abortion are the people you wouldn't want to fuck anyway?"
Yeah.
So he knew right away in that first joke that there were going to be people leaving, and he wanted them out. So he, and so he, and Todd and I, of course, were just dying. And then afterwards, we went back and went to see Dennis, and he goes, "Yeah, George isn't feeling well." And that's all right, I'll come and hang out. I hear in the hallway, "Where's the dirty female comic I'm supposed to meet?" And I was like, "Me? It's me." So I did get to meet both of my heroes. I'm still, fingers crossed, I'm putting it out to the universe because I really would love for Lily Tomlin to be part of Women of a Certain Age. So when we get the third one, hopefully maybe she will be the host of that. So I'll put that out there just so why not?
All right. So more looking forward to getting back on stage or going to a Mets game.
Mets game. Are you kidding me? I mean, come on. I mean, I just, I love the whole idea of baseball, as you know. I want to be able to, I'm one of those people that I get in my seat, and then as soon as I sit down, I get up and I go, "Well, who wants to eat? What are we eating? What are we drinking?" I love the whole experience of the game, and I miss that. I mean, the stage, you know how I am. I mean, I love the stage, I really do, but I also love directing, and I love developing, and I love producing. Yep. So, I can still do, the stand-up is this part of me. Like there's a huge circle, but there's little. I mean, it'll be fun to go back because I think all of us are going to be like, "Well, this has been an interesting few months." I'm going to try not to talk about the virus because I think everyone's going to talk about the virus, and I don't want. I've always hated that. I always hate doing what everyone else is doing.
Yep. All right. So.
All right.
Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. I'm positive we'll do another hour at some point because you got more to tell. people,
I do.
and everyone needs to write to Showtime right now. So there is a Women of a Certain Age 3, and then after you send that one, you need to write to Lily Tomlin and tell her she needs to host Funny Women of a Certain Age.
Here's what's one of the great things about doing the shows is I know that people know about the show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the industry knows about the show. So I think when we get, because I always say when, I don't say if, I say when we get it, there's nothing on the books that we haven't had the discussion, but I feel it's important to look positive. Is that it'll be easier to get who I want because of a third one. It was, you know what I mean? Like it was easier to get more people on the second one because we'd already done it. And anytime you do more of these things, it only makes you look good, because you're only as good as your last set. So fingers crossed. If Lily's listening, please, we'd love to have you.
And where can she find you online if she's listening? There you go.
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at Carole Montgomery Comic, and you can find me on Twitter at National Mom. I'm all over the place. And if you can't find me, call Jim.
Yeah, I always know where Carole is. All right. This has been an absolute pleasure, Carole. Thank you so much for stopping by and joining us. And stay safe and do a Zoom show.
No!
Do a Zoom show.
No! Bye.
Bye. Quite honestly, I could have talked to Carole for another hour, and we wouldn't have even scratched the surface on what she's done. She's a producer. She's a director. She's a writer. She's a creator. She's funny. She is what we all aspire to be, and that is in the game. So learn from people like this, grow from people like this. And I think the biggest takeaway from everything that I heard from Carole is that we need to get back to going to a Mets game. Take care, everybody. We will see you next time on the Comedy Legacy Show. I'm Jim Mendrinos. Good night, everybody.
This has been a New Media Comedy Worldwide production.
Thank you for watching the Comedy Legacy series. New episodes air every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern on New Media Comedy TV YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next week.